Well, let's get more on COP27 now with Amiera Sawas. She's the Director of Programs and Research at Climate Outreach, an organisation that aims to engage people with the climate crisis. She joins us now from London. Really good to have you with us, Amiera. We've heard the UN chief really throw down the gauntlet at the world leaders and delegates who are currently in Sharm el-Sheikh. We've got a lot of strong language from both him and other world leaders who've made their opening statements. What are you hoping will happen as a result of those strong words?
Well, look, implementation is the key theme of the conference this year, as well as, of course, climate justice and loss and damage. And I think from our perspective, what we're really hoping is that there's more attention actually paid to the role of the public. Because what we know from our research is that even though implementation has stalled year on year, the public across different countries, we've just done research across the EU, for example, is showing very high levels of support for acting on the climate crisis. Often decision makers will say, maybe our public are not going to get behind ambitious work, ambitious financing, but actually we know that they are. So where we think is important is unlocking the implementation is getting the public along. We saw Guterres talking a lot about we as a collective, about humanity, but often we're not connecting with people in their everyday lives. And they are also critical to putting that political mandate on decision makers.
Yes, and we know that COP27 is happening amid a war in Ukraine, also as there are repeated warnings about a possible global recession. Are you worried that perhaps because of the fact that economies around the world are currently struggling with high inflation and high energy costs, that perhaps commitments to increase funding towards the climate crisis may take a back seat?
I think sometimes decision makers may feel that the public won't get behind them to continue with these ambitious commitments. And so there is a fear of that backsliding happening. But what we know from research is that people still see the climate crisis as a major concern for them. So we just did research across 11 European countries, and 58% of young adults across Europe think that richer countries should compensate poorer countries facing loss and damage, for example. 81% of them think that we need to support vulnerable people within the EU and outside the EU to adapt. So we're not seeing climate change and climate ambition becoming less of a concern for people. They're just very concerned about the cost of living as well. It's not displacing the issue, it's coming up, and just the concern for the cost of living is slightly higher at the moment, which is understandable considering how it's affecting people's everyday lives in the immediate.
Yes, and that issue that you just mentioned, the idea that richer countries who are the world's biggest carbon polluters may be forced or are expected to help poorer nations who are suffering the consequences of the climate crisis, that looks set to be debated at a COP summit for the very first time. Are you expecting any traction to that? Will those richer polluting countries be held to account?
Well, it's been debated for quite a while, but in terms of there being an actual financial facility for that, the flows of finance to happen, that has what has stalled until these talks. I think it's going to be a challenge to actually finalise an arrangement, but there's more political will than there ever has been, probably because of the number of major crises that have happened across the world. Pakistan, where I worked for over 10 years, being a key example, with the floods displacing and affecting over 33 million people. So there's a lot of political leadership coming up from the countries that are really being affected by these crises, saying we have to put something in place. And we, as I said, we do see the public in many countries that they support initiatives for funding people affected by the crisis in the global south.
Okay, Amiera Sawas, we will have to leave it there, but of course we'll be keeping a very close eye on these climate negotiations over the next couple of weeks. Thank you again for joining us.